The air in the sub-level medical bay of Ocularis Reach tasted like a mixture of recycled sweat, ozone, and old copper. It was a flavor Caelum Vance had grown accustomed to over the last 5 years of his self-imposed exile. He was currently elbow-deep in the rusted chassis of an atmospheric scrubber, trying to coax one last breath out of a machine that had been decommissioned by the EtherCorp integration 3 decades ago. "Steady now, you old bucket of bolts," Caelum muttered, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He adjusted his visual overlay, his left eye glowing with the faint amber light of a tactical implant that had seen better days. The HUD flickered, warning him of low power, but he ignored it. He had 12 refugees from Sector 9 huddling in the back room, and if this scrubber didn't start cycling oxygen, they wouldn't last through the night rotation. Suddenly, a high-pitched melodic chime vibrated directly against his skull. It wasn't the emergency siren of the station, nor was it the proximity alarm of a corporate patrol. It was the distinct, sickeningly cheerful jingle of SyncLink, the interstellar dating app his former navigator had installed on his neural bridge as a joke 3 months ago. 99% compatibility detected, a synthesized female voice chirped into his auditory cortex. "Your cosmic resonance has found its anchor. Would you like to view your match?" Caelum nearly dropped his plasma welder. "Not now, you damn intrusive piece of junk. Opt out. Terminate session." But the app was persistent. EtherCorp had designed the latest firmware to be nearly unblockable, part of their push to increase social cohesion metrics. A holographic profile burst into his vision, overlaying the dirty metal of the scrubber with a shimmering gold frame. Username, Vexara Thal. Title, Supreme Hegemon of the Xylos 7th Fleet. Bio, seeking a partner with high structural integrity and zero corporate liens. Must be comfortable with high thermal environments and long periods of tactical silence. Caelum stared, his welder still sparking in his hand. Vexara Thal. He knew that name. Every veteran of the Vanguard Sentinels knew that name. She was the Crimson Ghost, the woman who had turned the Battle of the Orion Belt into a graveyard of Terran cruisers. The propaganda vids depicted her as a towering titan of scales and fury, a creature with 6 eyes that could see your sins before you committed them. Match exceeds all previous parameters by 347%, the app whispered seductively. "Boss, is the air coming back?" The voice of Jace, a young scrapper with a missing prosthetic arm, snapped Caelum back to the grim reality. He blinked away the holographic image of a stunningly terrifying alien queen and focused on the scrubber. "Give me a minute, Jace. This thing is being as stubborn as a mule," Caelum replied, wiping a smear of black grease across his forehead. "The corp rats are on the move, Caelum," Jace said, his voice trembling. "I heard the heavy boots on the level above. They're doing a sweep for the Vitality Ledger. My sister, she's barely 20 weeks along. If they find her without a lineage license, they'll put her in the debt mines." Caelum felt a familiar, cold anger settle in his gut. The Vitality Ledger was Director Alara Thorne's newest masterpiece of oppression. By turning the right to have children into a tradable corporate asset, EtherCorp had effectively turned the future into a subscription service. No credits, no children, no license. Your offspring were born as property of the company. They won't get past the door, Jace. I've reinforced the mag locks, Caelum lied. He knew the locks wouldn't hold against a dedicated breach team, but he needed the kid to keep his head. Before he could say another word, his neural implant chimed again. This time it wasn't the app. It was a direct, high-priority encrypted message. Subject, tactical consultation. From Vexara Thal. Content, Caelum Vance. Former Sentinel, serial number 88 Alpha 9. I am currently docking at the neutral zone spire of Ocularis Reach. Your stance on bioethical autonomy is refreshing. Meet me at the Event Horizon Lounge in 2 hours. Do not be late. I dislike waiting as much as I dislike corporate interference. Caelum sat back on his heels, the plasma welder clattering to the floor. The War Queen of the Xylos hegemony hadn't just matched with him on a dating app. She had hunted down his encrypted military ID and summoned him to a meeting. You've got to be kidding me, he whispered. The ceiling above them groaned as the heavy thud of mag boots echoed through the vents. EtherCorp peacekeepers. The tin cans, as the vets called them. They were early. "Jace, get everyone into the crawl space, now!" Caelum barked, his voice shifting back into the tone of a sentinel commander. "Seal the inner hatch and don't make a sound. If the tin cans break in, I'll handle the talking." "But Caelum, your own license is—" "I said move!" As the young scrapper scrambled to lead the refugees into the shadows, Caelum stood up, popping his neck. He reached into the hidden compartment of the atmospheric scrubber and pulled out a small, sleek device, a logic jammer. It was illegal, highly dangerous, and the only thing that could scramble a corporate biometric scanner. He looked at the sync link notification still flickering in the corner of his eye. 99% compatibility. He looked at the heavy steel door of his clinic, which was beginning to glow red as a thermal cutter bit into the hinges from the outside. "Well, Vexara," he muttered, checking the charge on his jammer. "If I'm not dead in the next 20 minutes, I might just take you up on that coffee." The door exploded inward in a shower of white-hot sparks. 4 peacekeepers in polished white and blue ceramic armor stepped through the smoke, their pulse rifles leveled at Caelum's chest. "Caelum Vance," the lead trooper announced, his voice distorted by a helmet speaker, "you are in violation of Station Ordinance 42. You are harboring unregistered biological assets and operating an unlicensed medical facility. Submit to biometric scanning for the Vitality Ledger assessment." Caelum raised his hands slowly, a tired smirk playing on his lips. "You guys really need a new script. That one's getting a bit repetitive, don't you think? Compliance is mandatory, Sentinel. Don't make us zap you into the next solar cycle." Caelum's thumb hovered over the trigger of the jammer in his pocket. He was outnumbered and outgunned, but he was a man who had already lost his soul to a corporation once. He wasn't about to let them take his clinic too. Then his implant hummed one last time. Message: "I am watching your clinic feed. You are about to do something brave and remarkably stupid. I am 3 floors above you. Hold your breath." Caelum didn't have time to process the message before the ceiling above the peacekeepers didn't just groan. It disintegrated. A pillar of pure, concentrated thermal energy punched through the reinforced plating, turning the lead trooper's armor into a puddle of molten ceramic in a heartbeat. Through the hole in the ceiling, a figure descended with the grace of a falling star. She was 7 feet of crimson-skinned majesty, her 6 golden eyes glowing with the intensity of a dying sun. She wore robes of woven obsidian that seemed to absorb the light around her, and in her 4 hands, she held nothing but the raw, shimmering heat of the void. Vexarathal had arrived. "He is with me," she said, her voice a melodic resonance that made the very air in the room vibrate. "And the Xylos hegemony does not recognize the authority of a ledger." The remaining peacekeepers froze, their rifles shaking. "You didn't shoot a Xylos queen unless you wanted your entire star system to be erased from the charts." Caelum looked up at her, his jaw hanging slightly open. She was even more terrifying and more beautiful than the profile picture. "You're late," he said, his voice finally finding its footing. Vexara turned 2 of her eyes toward him, a faint lavender hue touching her cheeks, the Xylos equivalent of a blush. "I had to find a parking spot for a battleship, Caelum. Now shall we go? We have a revolution to discuss, and I believe you owe me a drink." Vexarathal moved through the corridors of Ocularis Reach like a predator disguised as royalty. Behind her, Caelum Vance walked with a wary, measured stride, his eyes constantly scanning their 6. He was a small man by Xylos standards, but he moved with a compact efficiency that Vexara found stimulating. The sync link algorithm had been right about his structural integrity. Even in his grease-stained jacket, he carried the weight of a man who had stood his ground while empires crumbled. "You realize you just incinerated a squad of corporate security in broad daylight," Caelum said, his voice low. "Director Thorne is going to have a stroke. She'll lock down the entire Reach." "Let her," Vexara replied, her voice echoing with a slight harmonic trill. "The Xylos hegemony has been looking for an excuse to test the efficacy of EtherCorp's new shield generators. If she wants a war over a few tin cans, I am more than happy to oblige." "It's not just about the guards," Caelum countered, stepping up beside her as they entered a high-speed transit lift. "It's about those people back in the clinic. By saving me, you've put a giant target on their heads. EtherCorp doesn't forgive, and they sure as hell don't forget." Vexara pressed a clawed finger against the lift's destination pad. Two of her 6 eyes remained fixed on Caelum, while the others watched the lift's security sensors. You think too much like a soldier who has lost his command, Caelum. You see only the immediate tactical cost. You do not see the strategic opportunity. Enlighten me, Your Majesty. The Vitality Ledger is not just a human problem. EtherCorp is attempting to export the system to the hegemony. They call it genetic optimization agreements. I call it the end of my people's sovereignty. They want to license our broodmothers, Caelum. They want to put a price on Xylo's souls. The lift hissed as it accelerated toward the upper spires. Caelum leaned against the wall, his expression softening into something like empathy. So, the match wasn't an accident. Nothing in the Xylos hegemony is an accident, Vexara said, though she felt a slight warmth in her secondary circulatory system. My intelligence division has been monitoring SyncLink's deep code. We discovered that the algorithm was being used by EtherCorp to identify individuals with high genetic resistance to their behavioral modification subroutines. They weren't looking for love. They were looking for threats. Caelum let out a short, dry laugh. And they found a war queen and a broken sentinel. Talk about a backfire. Indeed, our compatibility rating of 99% is not just a measure of personality, Caelum. It is a measure of our combined potential to disrupt their system. We are the glitch they cannot fix. The lift doors slid open to reveal the event horizon, a lounge that hung over the edge of the station like a glass-bottomed jewel. Below them, the purple gases of the Ocularis Nebula swirled in an endless dance. The lounge was nearly empty, save for a few wealthy traders and a nervous-looking barkeep. Vexara led him to a corner table that offered a panoramic view of the stars. She sat down, her forearms folding neatly in front of her. Caelum took the seat opposite, looking remarkably unimpressed by the luxury. So, he said, leaning forward, you saved my life, you've declared war on a corporation, and now you want to have a drink. What's the catch? There's always a catch with royalty. Vexara studied him. Most humans stammered or bowed in her presence. Caelum Vance just wanted to know the price. The catch is that I require more than a political ally. To block the implementation of the Vitality Ledger, I must invoke the right of synaptic splicing. Caelum frowned. Splicing? That sounds like something involving a lot of needles. It is a biological commitment, Vexara explained, her tone becoming more formal. An ancient Xylos rite used during times of existential crisis. It creates a temporary shared genetic field between two individuals. By Xylos law, a splice partner is considered a sovereign extension of the queen. By Terran law, under the Interspecies Covenant of 2387, it would grant you full diplomatic immunity from EtherCorp's jurisdiction. Caelum was silent for a long moment, the implications of her words sinking in. You're talking about a marriage, a bio-linked, high-stakes, interstellar marriage of convenience. Convenience is a pale word for what I am proposing, Vexara said, her golden eyes shimmering. The bond is intense. It will link our neural pathways. You will feel my thoughts, my heat, my history, and I will feel yours. We have 72 hours to complete the process, or the biological rejection will be fatal. Fatal for who? For both of us. Caelum rubbed his jaw, his fingers tracing the scar where a piece of shrapnel had once embedded itself. You're a war queen with a fleet. I'm a guy who fixes air scrubbers for refugees. Why me? Why not some high-ranking general or a diplomat? Because the 99% doesn't lie, Caelum, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The algorithm found the one man in this quadrant whose soul burns with the same defiance as mine. I do not need a general. I have plenty of those. I need a man who knows that dignity is worth more than a vitality license. I need a man who is brave enough to be a father in a galaxy that wants to own his children. Caelum looked out at the nebula. He thought of Jace's sister, hiding in a crawl space. He thought of the thousands of families on the Reach who were being slowly strangled by Alarathorn's spreadsheets. Then he looked back at Vexara. She was an alien, a queen, and a warrior who could kill him with a thought. But in her eyes he saw loneliness that mirrored his own, a weariness born of carrying the world on her shoulders. 72 hours, huh? Caelum said, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across his face. 72 hours, Vexera confirmed. Well, I've never been one for long engagements anyway. Let's do it. Vexera reached across the table, her upper right hand finding Caelum's calloused palm. As their skin met, a jolt of pure thermal energy surged through him, making his tactical implant flare with light. The lounge's security sensors began to scream as the atmospheric temperature around their table rose by 20 degrees. The splicing has begun, Vexera whispered. At that moment, the holographic screens in the lounge flickered to life. The cold, beautiful face of director Ilara Thorne appeared on every frequency. Citizens of Ocularis Reach, the director said, her voice like ice cutting through glass. It has come to our attention that a dangerous terrorist element has conspired with a foreign power to undermine the security of the Vitality Ledger. As of this moment, Caelum Vance is declared legally dead. His citizenship is revoked. Any being aiding him will be considered an enemy of the integration. We are initiating a station-wide purge. Compliance is your only salvation. Caelum didn't flinch. He just squeezed Vexara's hand. Legally dead, huh? That's the second time this week. She really needs to work on her threats. Vexara stood up, her robes swirling with dark energy. She calls you dead. I call you my king. Let us go, Caelum. We have 72 hours to make a miracle and a corporation to burn. As they walked out of the lounge, the SyncLink app on Caelum's bridge gave one final, satisfied chime. Synchronization in progress. Estimated time to full compatibility, 71 hours and 59 minutes. Good luck, lovers. Caelum chuckled. You know, Vexara, for a dating app, this thing has one hell of a sense of timing. Vexara's mandibles clicked in amusement as she led him toward the docking bays. The war for the future had officially begun, and for the first time in his life, Caelum Vance felt like he was finally on the winning side. The air in the maintenance ducts of Ocularis Reach was a stagnant soup of recycled grease and the copper tang of old filtration units. It was a place for rats, rogue droids, and men who were officially supposed to be dead. Caelum Vance squeezed through a particularly narrow junction, his tactical vest scraping against the rusted rivets of the ventilation shaft. Behind him, the rhythmic metallic clack of Vexara's clawed feet against the plating sounded like a ticking clock, a constant reminder that their time was bleeding away. He felt a sudden, sharp spike of heat in the center of his chest. It wasn't the external environment. It was an internal fire, radiating from his heart and pulsing toward his extremities. Damn it, Caelum wheezed, his left eye implant flickering between a standard thermal view and a static-filled blue. The thrum. It's getting louder. It is not a thrum, Caelum, Vexara's voice echoed through his mind, not just his ears. The synaptic splicing was weaving their nervous systems together, turning their thoughts into a shared, tangled web. It is the resonance of our circulatory systems attempting to find a common frequency. My people call it the kindling. Your biology is remarkably resistant to the change. Yeah, well, humans are stubborn like that, Caelum replied, stopping at a junction to catch his breath. He leaned his head against the cold metal, but it offered no relief. Through the bond, he could feel the immense, scorching vitality of the Xylos Queen. It was like being tethered to a small star. He could feel her pride, a towering monument of glass and fire. But underneath it, he felt a strange, shimmering loneliness that made his own heart ache with a familiarity he didn't want to acknowledge. He turned to look at her. In the cramped, dimly lit duct, Vexara looked less like a conqueror and more like a captured god. Her 6 golden eyes were wide, tracking the flow of data he was receiving through his neural bridge. The lavender blush on her crimson skin was deeper now, a sign of the physical toll the splicing was taking. We need to get to the scrap grave in Sector 14, Caelum said, forced to focus on the mission to drown out the sensation of her pulse in his fingertips. My old squad mate, Caelum, runs a black market medical rig there. If anyone can keep us from flatlining before the 72 hours are up, it's him. Ether Corp has already saturated the local net with your dead status, Caelum, Vexara noted, her forearms moving in a complex, rhythmic pattern as she manipulated a holographic map. Your digital footprint has been zeroed. Your credits, your access codes, even your history in the Vanguard Sentinels, it has all been archived as terminated assets. Shanam, You are a ghost in the machine. Story of my life, Caelum grunted. I've been a ghost since the Orion Purge. Thorn is just making it official. But she's forgotten one thing. You can't kill what's already buried in the dirt. They reached a heavy iron grate overlooking a sprawling industrial abyss. This was the true Ocularis Reach, the place where the glimmer of the upper spires died and was replaced by the dust of the working class. Below them, massive pistons the size of skyscrapers hammered away at raw ore, sending tremors through the floorboards every 5 seconds. Thousands of workers, human, xylos, tellarite, and species Caelum couldn't even name, moved like ants through the smog, their lives measured in production quotas and vitality credits. Caelum kicked the grate open, the metal clattering loudly into the darkness. He jumped first, landing on a rusted catwalk with a heavy thud. Vexara followed, her robes billowing like a shadow as she descended with a grace that defied gravity. They are everywhere, Vexara whispered, two of her eyes looking upward. Caelum followed her gaze. Hovering high above the industrial floor were dozens of vitality scanners, sleek silver spheres that emitted a soft blue light. They were searching for unregistered genetic signatures, hunting for the unborn children who hadn't been licensed into the corporate ledger. A few meters away, a young Tellarite woman was being cornered by a pair of peacekeepers. The tin cans were using their shock batons to force her against a wall, while a scanner hovered inches from her face. Subject, Melina Vor. Status, delinquent. The scanner's mechanical voice boomed over the roar of the machinery. Lineage license, expired. Reproductive assets, forfeited. Submit for debt assignment. Please, the woman cried, her tusks trembling. My husband is in the mines. We just need another week. Al-Rekhi, the lead peacekeeper, didn't hesitate. He raised his baton, the blue energy crackling. Protocol is absolute, Corp Rat. You shouldn't have been so greedy with your DNA. Caelum's hand went instinctively to the kinetic pistol at his hip, but Vexara's hand, the upper one, caught his wrist with the strength of a hydraulic press. If you fire, every sentinel droid in this sector will be on us in 6 seconds, she warned, her voice a low vibration in his skull. We cannot save her if we are zeroed. I can't just watch this, Vexara, Caelum hissed, his jaw tight. This is what I fought against for 20 years. This is why I left the Vanguard. We were supposed to protect people, not police their bloodlines. He looked at the Tellarite woman and saw the same terror he had seen in Jace's sister. It wasn't just about a law. It was about the systematic erasure of the right to be different, to be unpredictable, to be alive without a permission slip from a board of directors. Vexara's grip on his wrist didn't loosen, but the lavender hue on her face shifted to a deep, angry violet. I did not say we would do nothing. I said you would not fire. She stepped forward, her robes shimmering. She didn't use a weapon. She simply closed her 6 eyes and reached out with all 4 hands. The air around the peacekeepers began to warp, the temperature spiking so rapidly that the metal catwalk beneath them began to glow cherry red. The peacekeepers' armor, designed to deflect pulse fire and kinetic rounds, wasn't prepared for a localized thermal surge of 600 degrees Celsius. The ceramic plates began to buckle and fuse. The electronics in their helmets screamed as the cooling systems failed. The lead trooper dropped his baton, his hands smoking. Overheat! Weapon malfunction! Static in the HUD! Vexara didn't stop. She pushed the thermal field further, a wave of pure, shimmering heat that sent the peacekeepers scrambling backward, their boots melting into the catwalk. The vitality scanner, its sensors blinded by the infrared flare, spun in circles before slamming into a support pillar and exploding in a shower of sparks. Move! Vexara commanded the Tellarite woman. The refugee didn't need to be told twice. She vanished into the smog of the industrial sector without looking back. Vexara exhaled, her shoulders sagging. The effort had cost her. She leaned against Caelum, her skin burning through his jacket. Through the bond, Caelum felt a sudden, crushing wave of her history. The sight of her own kin being incinerated by a rival clan's orbital strike. She had used her heat not to kill, but to drive the shadows away. That was impressive, Caelum said, supporting her weight, and remarkably loud. We need to bug out before the reinforcements arrive. I felt your anger, Caelum, she whispered, her eyes fluttering open. It is a cold thing, like a blade kept in the dark. It is different from the fire of my people, but it is no less sharp. Anger is the only thing Ether Corp hasn't figured out how to license yet, Caelum replied, his voice softening. Come on. Kalen's rig is 3 levels down. We take the gravity chute near the smelter. They moved through the dust with the practiced shadows of survivors. The industrial sector was a labyrinth of noise and suffering, a place where diversity was treated as a manufacturing defect. Caelum watched the faces they passed, the hollow eyes of those who had already been optimized, their natural curiosity replaced by the dull, flat obedience of the behavioral modules. As they descended deeper, the shared sensations of the splicing bond began to manifest in stranger ways. Caelum found himself reflexively attempting to use forearms he didn't possess. Vexara, in turn, began to hum a low, melancholy tune, an old Terran folk song Caelum's mother used to sing, a song he hadn't thought of in 30 years. Why do you keep that melody in your primary cortex? Vexara asked, her tone curious. It has no tactical value. It is a sequence of notes that signifies loss. It's called a lullaby, Vexara, Caelum said, a ghost of a smile appearing on his face. It's not for tactical value. It's for remembering that the world wasn't always a ledger. It's for the things that don't need a reason to exist. The Xylos do not have such things, she said, her golden eyes reflecting the orange glow of the smelters. Every song we sing is a record of a victory or a lament for a defeat. We do not sing for the sake of the air. Maybe you should start, Caelum said. Might make the 99% compatibility a bit easier to swallow. They reached a massive lead-lined door hidden behind a pile of discarded fusion cores. Caelum stepped forward and knocked a rhythmic sequence. 3 sharp taps, 2 slow, 1 sharp. A small slit in the door opened, revealing a single, cybernetic eye that whirred as it scanned Caelum's face. Vance, the net says you're zeroed, kid. A gruff, mechanical voice echoed through the speaker. Says you're a dead man walking with a very expensive alien shadow. Then I guess I'm just a very talkative corpse, Caelum replied. Open the damn door before the vulture squad finds a reason to start pecking at our vitals. The door hissed open, revealing a cavernous space filled with the hum of illegal medical equipment and the smell of high-grade antiseptic. Caelum, a man who was more machine than flesh, stood at the center of the room, his 4 mechanical arms holding a variety of surgical tools. Welcome to the scrap grave, Caelum said, his optics flickering as they landed on Vexara. I see you've brought a queen to my gutter, Caelum. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. We're spliced, Caelum said, collapsing onto a nearby medical crate. The kindling was reaching a fever pitch now. Every heartbeat felt like a drum being struck inside his skull. We have 64 hours left. Our blood is rejecting the match. We need stabilization. Caelum's mechanical arms froze. He looked from Caelum to Vexara, his sensors clicking frantically. Synaptic splicing? Between a human and a Xylos? That's not just illegal, Vance. That's biological heresy. Thorn will burn this entire station to the ground to get a sample of your blood. She's already trying, Vexara said, her voice regaining its royal steel. The question is, are you brave enough to help the heresy survive? Caelum let out a sound like grinding gears. A laugh. Kid, I've been running this rig in the shadows of Ether Corp for 15 years. I was born for heresy. Get on the table, both of you. We've got a lot of work to do, and very little time to do it. As Caelum and Vexara climbed onto the shared medical platform, their hands naturally found each other. In the flickering light of the scrap grave, the veteran and the queen looked like a single, unified being, a defiant glitch in a world of perfect control. 99%, Caelum muttered, staring at his scanners. The algorithm wasn't matching personalities. It was matching souls. Caelum looked at Vexara, and for the first time, he didn't see a war queen or an alien. He saw the other half of a miracle. Well, he whispered, his eyes closing as Caelum began the stabilization process. Let's hope the soul math is right, because the body math is looking pretty grim. The kindling flared one last time, a blinding white light in his mind, and then there was only the steady, shared rhythm of 2 hearts beating as one. The stabilization process felt like having his veins scrubbed with liquid nitrogen, while his brain was being slowly microwaved. Caelum Vance drifted in and out of a feverish haze, his mind a kaleidoscope of Vixara's memories and his own. He saw the soaring crystal spires of the Xylos' homeworld, feeling the intense solar radiation of their binary suns as a soothing warmth rather than a lethal dose. He saw the faces of his lost squad, their features blurring into the regal countenances of Xylos generals who had fallen in the same useless wars. When he finally clawed his way back to consciousness, the scrap grave was eerily quiet. The only sound was the low rhythmic hum of a life support unit and the distant muffled thud of the station's atmospheric pumps. Caelum tried to sit up, but his body felt like it was made of lead. His left eye implant was no longer flickering. It was a solid, steady amber, providing a crisp, high-definition overlay of the room. "Don't try to move yet, kid," Caelan's voice came from the shadows. The old medic was hunched over a workstation, his mechanical arms moving with a jittery, nervous energy. "I had to rewire your neural bridge to handle the extra bandwidth. You were leaking data like a cracked fusion core." "Vexara," Caelum rasped, his throat feeling like he'd swallowed a handful of dry sand. "I am here, Caelum." He turned his head. Vexara was sitting in a chair beside his bed, her upper hands resting on her knees, her lower hands holding a small glowing data shard. She looked weary, the crimson of her skin muted to a dusty rose, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "The stabilization was successful," she said, her voice echoing in his mind with a new, crystalline clarity. The bond was no longer a chaotic thrum, it was a steady, silent conversation. "Caelum has introduced a synthetic catalyst into our systems. It has bought us more time, but the biological completion still requires a physical anchor." "How much time?" Caelum asked. 58 hours, Caelum replied, turning around. His cybernetic optic was spinning wildly. "But that's the least of your static, Vance. While you were under, Thorne pushed the Dignity Act into the final phase. She's not waiting for the council vote anymore. She's initiated a genetic sweep of the entire reach." Caelum felt the cold nod of dread return. "A sweep? What does that mean?" "It means Ether Corp is going floor by floor with heavy-duty biometric dampeners," Caelum explained, projecting a station map onto the wall. Red zones were spreading across the lower sectors like a bloodstain. "Anyone who isn't on the ledger, anyone who's suboptimal or unlicensed, is being rounded up and sent to the reprocessing hubs. They're purging the diversity, Caelum. They're cleaning the slate." "And my clinic?" Caelum's voice was a low growl. Caelum looked away. "Gone. The peacekeepers breached it 4 hours ago. Jace and the others. They were taken. My sensors picked up a high-priority transport leaving Sector 9 and heading for the main hub." Caelum swung his legs over the side of the bed, the movement sending a jolt of pain through his spine, but he didn't care. "They took the kid? They took Jace?" "He stood his ground, Caelum," Vexara said softly, her golden eyes filled with a sad respect. "I felt his defiance through the station's ambient resonance before the dampeners went up. He was protecting the others until the very end." Caelum stood up, his knees buckling for a second before he found his balance. He grabbed his grease-stained jacket and checked his kinetic pistol. "We're not staying here. We're going to that hub." "Vance, listen to me," Caelum shouted, his mechanical arms gesturing frantically. "Thorne has declared you legally dead." "Do you understand what that means in this station? Your DNA is a kill signal. The moment you step out of this lead-lined tomb, the automated turrets will zero you before you can blink." "Then I'll just have to move faster than the sensors," Caelum said, his voice cold and flat. "Those people trusted me. I promised them dignity, Caelum. I didn't mean dignity as long as it's convenient." Vexara stood up, her 7-foot frame filling the room. "He is right, medic. A queen who does not protect her brood is no queen at all, and a partner who does not stand by his bondmate is no partner." She looked at Caelum, her 6 eyes shimmering with a dangerous light. "We shall go to this hub. We shall show this director that the Xylos hegemony does not recognize her ledgers, and the Terran Sentinels do not forget their oaths." Caelum sighed, a sound of escaping steam. "You two are the most expensive, high-maintenance idiots I've ever met. Fine. If you're going to commit suicide, you might as well do it with style." He reached under his desk and pulled out 2 sleek black devices. "These are phase shifters. They'll mask your biometric signatures for about 30 minutes at a time. It won't stop a physical search, but it'll keep the automated turrets from turning you into Swiss cheese. Thanks, Caelum, Caelum said, taking the shifters. I owe you one. You owe me about 50,000 credits and a new heart, Vance, Caelum grumbled. Now get out of here. The Vulture Squad is already sniffing around the ventilation shafts. Caelum and Vexara slipped out of the scrap grave and back into the industrial smog. The atmosphere on the Reach had shifted. The usual background noise of production had been replaced by an ominous, heavy silence, broken only by the distant screams of families being torn apart and the mechanical drone of peacekeeper announcements. Attention, citizens, the station's speakers droned. Optimization is for your own benefit. Diversity is instability. Homogeneity is peace. Report all unregistered genetic assets to the nearest peacekeeper unit. They speak of peace while they harvest the souls of the weak, Vexara whispered, her 4 hands clenched into fists. Your species is capable of such profound cruelty, Caelum. It is a wonder you survived the stars at all. We're also capable of profound stubbornness, Caelum replied, checking his HUD. The main hub is 2 kilometers through the old rail tunnels. We stay low and use the shifters when we cross the open plazas. As they navigated the tunnels, the splicing bond began to feed Caelum more than just Vexara's emotions. He began to see the world through her eyes. The drab gray metal of the tunnels wasn't just metal, it was a vibrant tapestry of thermal gradients. He could see the heat of the power cables pulsing behind the walls, the warm breath of the station's lifeblood flowing through the pipes. He felt more connected to the environment than he ever had with his military implants. But he also felt her fear. It was a sharp, jagged thing, hidden deep behind her royal armor. She was afraid of the High Council, of the judgment of her people, of the possibility that she really was contaminated by her connection to a human. They're wrong, you know, Caelum said suddenly, his voice echoing in the quiet tunnel. Vexara paused, turning 2 of her eyes toward him. Who is wrong? Your council, Thorn, everyone who thinks this is a mistake, this, whatever we are. He gestured between them. It's not contamination. It's the only thing that's ever made sense to me. I've spent my whole life being a component in a machine, first the military, then the corporation. But with you, I feel like a person, a messy, complicated, 99% compatible person. Vexara was silent for a long moment. The lavender blush returned, spreading across her neck and shoulders. I have spent my life as a symbol, Caelum, a monument to my people's strength. I have never been allowed to be messy, but your presence is like a fire that does not burn. It warms the cold spaces I didn't know I had. She reached out and touched the scar on his jaw, her clawed fingers surprisingly gentle. If this is a mistake, it is the most beautiful one the Xylos have ever made. The moment was shattered by a high-pitched electronic screech. A Vulture-class hunter drone dropped from the ceiling of the tunnel, its red optical sensor locking onto their position. Target identified, Caelum Vance. Status, legally dead. Deploying termination protocols, the drone announced, its twin rotary cannons spinning up. Phase shifters, Caelum yelled, slamming the device on his belt. The world blurred as the shifter engaged, creating a flickering, translucent field around them. The drone's cannons opened fire, the kinetic rounds whistling through the air, where Caelum had been standing a split second before. Vexara didn't wait for the drone to recalibrate. She lunged forward, her robes snapping like a whip. She didn't use her thermal induction. Instead, she used her sheer alien physical power. She caught the drone in all 4 hands, her claws tearing through the reinforced alloy like it was wet paper. With a guttural roar, she ripped the machine in half, tossing the smoking remains into the darkness. We are being tracked, she said, her breathing heavy. The shifters are not enough. Thorn has adjusted the sensor parameters to look for the phase distortion itself. Then we stop hiding, Caelum said, his eyes glowing with a fierce tactical intensity. If she wants a ghost, let's give her one she can't ignore. They reached the end of the tunnel, which opened into the central plaza of the industrial hub. The sight that greeted them was a nightmare. Hundreds of refugees were being loaded into massive, windowless containers, biological cargo being prepared for optimization. At the center of the plaza, a towering holographic image of Director Thorne watched over the proceedings, her expression one of cold, clinical satisfaction. Among the crowd, Caelum spotted a familiar face. Jace was being dragged toward a container, his single arm pinned behind his back by a peacekeeper. "Jace!" Caelum roared, his voice carrying over the mechanical din. The peacekeepers turned as one, their pulse rifles leveling at the entrance of the tunnel. "Caelum Vance!" Director Thorne's voice echoed through the plaza, the holographic image turning to face him. "I must admit, I am impressed. You have managed to survive the legal death of your identity. But you are a relic of an inefficient past. This station belongs to the Ledger now." Caelum stepped out into the open, Vexora flanking him like a guardian goddess. He didn't raise his pistol. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small battered datapad, the one he'd used in the clinic to track the refugees' medical needs. "You think you own this station, Thorne?" Caelum shouted, his voice steady and sharp. "You think you can license the future? Look around you. These people aren't assets. They aren't numbers on a spreadsheet. They're the ones who keep this bucket of bolts spinning while you're up in your glimmer tower sipping synthetic wine." "Sentimentality is a flaw, Mr. Vance," Thorne replied, her holographic eyes narrowing. "One that we are currently correcting in your friends." "It's not sentimentality, it's diversity," Caelum countered. He looked at Vexera, and through the bond, he sent her a single tactical thought. The mainframe link. Now. Vexera understood. She didn't attack the peacekeepers. She didn't incinerate the guards. Instead, she turned toward the central pillar of the plaza, the massive data conduit that linked the industrial sector to the station's primary mainframe. She raised all four hands, her skin beginning to glow with a blinding, white-hot intensity. But she wasn't generating heat. She was generating a bioelectric pulse, a localized electromagnetic storm fueled by the kindling of their shared bond. "What is she doing?" Thorne's voice carried a hint of panic. "Security! Terminate her! Now!" The peacekeepers opened fire, but the rounds melted before they could reach Vexara's thermal field. The air in the plaza began to shimmer and scream. Caelum slammed his datapad into a nearby maintenance port, his fingers flying over the screen. He wasn't hacking the system, he was opening a door. "Citizens of Ocularis Reach!" Caelum's voice was broadcast through every speaker on the station, a backdoor override he'd spent 5 years preparing. "Director Thorne says you're suboptimal. She says your children belong to the company. She says you're legally dead if you don't follow the Ledger. But I'm standing here with a Xylo's queen, and our blood is telling a different story." At that moment, Vexera unleashed the pulse. A massive arc of blue-white energy surged from her body into the data conduit. It didn't destroy the station. It didn't kill the power. It did something much worse for EtherCorp. It overloaded the Vitality Ledger. The holographic screens throughout the station flickered and died, replaced by a single pulsing image. The 99% compatibility match between Caelum Vance and Vexera. "The Ledger is a lie!" Caelum shouted, his words echoing through the minds of everyone connected to the station's net. Compatibility isn't about credits. It isn't about licenses. It's about the glitch. It's about the things they can't control. Look at us, a human and a Xylos, spliced, bonded, and our child is going to be the first one born without a license in 1,000 years. The plaza went silent. The peacekeepers lowered their rifles, their own neural bridges flooded with the resonance of the bond. For a split second, the homogeneity of the station was shattered by the sheer, overwhelming power of diversity. "You've ruined everything," Thorne's holographic image whispered, her face distorted by the data storm. "No," Vexera replied, her voice a melodic thunder that shook the foundations of the Reach. "We have simply restored the pulse. The era of the Ledger is over. The era of the heartbeat has begun." As the first ripples of revolution began to stir among the industrial workers, Caelum felt a sudden sharp pain in his chest. The kindling was reaching its final stage. He collapsed to his knees, his vision fading to white. Vexera was there, her forearms catching him, her heat a soothing balm against the cold of his exhaustion. "Stay with me, Caelum," she whispered. "We have 55 hours left, and a galaxy to change." Through the white light, Caelum saw the faces of the refugees, Jace, the Tellarite woman, the thousands of suboptimal beings. They weren't just assets anymore. They were a family. And for the first time in 40 years, Caelum Vance felt like he was finally home. Not bad for a first date, he managed to mutter before the darkness took him. Vexara's soft, barking laugh was the last thing he heard, a song of hope echoing through the dust of Ocularis Reach. The darkness in the sub-basement of the industrial hub was not the empty, peaceful void of deep space. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that smelled of ancient lubricants, stagnant coolant, and the metallic tang of fear. Caelum Vance felt the floor plating vibrating against his cheek, a rhythmic thumping that synced perfectly with the frantic drum of his own heart. Or was it Vexara's heart? In the thick of the kindling, the distinction between his pulse and hers was becoming a frayed thread, snapping under the weight of their shared biology. "Wake up, Sentinel. The shadows are growing teeth." Vexara's voice didn't come from the air. It resonated from the base of his skull, a vibrating frequency that tasted like cinnamon and felt like a low-voltage shock. Caelum groaned, his left eye implant whirring as it tried to calibrate in the absolute gloom. The HUD flickered a sickly, bruised purple before settling into a grainy thermal overlay. He saw her then, a towering silhouette of brilliant, pulsating orange and red. To his augmented eyes, she wasn't just a person. She was a localized sun, a source of life-giving heat in a tomb of cold iron. I'm up, Caelum rasped, pushing himself off the deck. Every joint in his body felt like it had been injected with powdered glass. "How long was I ghosted?" 14 minutes, Vexara replied. She was crouched near a massive rusted valve, two of her eyes fixed on the door they had welded shut, while the others scanned the ceiling for vent crawlers. "Your nervous system attempted to bypass the neural bridge. It seems the data storm we unleashed on the ledger had unforeseen consequences for our shared interface." Caelum spat a mouthful of copper-tasted saliva onto the floor. "Unforeseen is the motto of my life, Vexara, along with unlucky and underpaid. Status report? We are in the deep sump of Sector 18, she said, her voice dropping into a rhythmic trill that signaled tactical alertness. The station-wide broadcast was successful. The Vitality Ledger is in a state of recursive collapse. Ether Corp's technicians are fighting to purge the 99% compatibility match from the mainframe, but the logic loop I initiated is rooted in the station's core firmware. They cannot kill the ghost without killing the machine." Caelum leaned against a dripping pipe, the heat of Vexara's presence making the cold dampness of his jacket steam. "Thorn won't wait for the tech heads to fix it. She'll send the cleanup crews, elite mercs, not just the standard tin cans. They don't care about collateral, and they sure as hell don't care about diplomatic immunity." He felt a sudden, sharp pang of sorrow through the bond. It wasn't his. It was a cold, crystalline grief that belonged to Vexara. Images flashed through his mind. A Xylo's nursery, thousands of glowing amber eggs, and the sudden, silent onset of a genetic blight that had turned them to gray ash. "You're worried about the brood," Caelum whispered, reaching out to steady himself. Vexara turned all six eyes toward him, the gold in her irises swirling like molten metal. "My people have always sought perfection, Caelum. We pruned our own diversity for the sake of the hegemony's strength. We thought homogeneity was the shield that would protect us from the void. But the blight proved us wrong. It found one weakness and turned it into an extinction event." She stepped closer, the sheer physical scale of her forcing Caelum to look up. "Director Thorn is attempting to do the same to your kind. She calls it optimization. I call it a grave. If she succeeds in making every human mind a mirror of her own, your species will not survive the first tragedy it cannot predict." "Diversity is a messy business, Vexara," Caelum said, his voice softening. "It means people make mistakes. It means we argue, we fight, and we screw up the blueprints. But it's the only way we find the glitches that actually work. Like us." He felt a strange, fluttering sensation in his lower abdomen, a warmth that wasn't thermal energy. It was a localized, biological hum, a resonance that felt ancient and terrifyingly new. "Vexara, what is that? The bond, it's doing something else. It feels like Like my DNA is being rewritten in real time. The Xylos queen went very still. The lavender blush on her crimson skin became a vivid, startling violet. She reached out with her lower hands, her palms hovering inches from Caelum's chest. The air between them shimmered with biothermal induction. The splicing has reached the third tier, she whispered, her voice trembling with a rare vulnerability. The biological completion has found its anchor. Caelum, the compatibility math, it wasn't just matching our defiance. Then what was it matching? Potential, Vixera said, her eyes shimmering with starlight. The algorithm identified that our combined genetic markers could overcome the species barrier. It wasn't looking for a partner for me, Caelum. It was looking for a progenitor, a way to create a bridge that the ledger could never categorize. Caelum's brain felt like it was trying to process a code break that had no cipher. You're telling me you're caring already? The Xylos do not conceive as humans do, she explained, her harmonic trill becoming a low melodic song. The splicing is an instantaneous cellular merger. The moment we touched in the event horizon, the bridge was built. Our child is already a heartbeat in the resonance, a hybrid of starlight and iron. Caelum slumped back against the pipes, his legs finally giving out. A hybrid, a human Xylos kid, in a station that wants to license the right to breathe? He let out a breathy, hysterical laugh. Well, if we were looking for a way to really piss Thorn off, I think we just hit the jackpot. The moment of revelation was shattered by the sound of a distant explosion. The heavy, reinforced door at the end of the corridor groaned as a thermal lance began to bite through the hinges. Target identified. A cold, synthetic voice echoed through the hallway. Priority 1 assets. Zero tolerance, engage. Deploy the Apex Stalkers. Sounds like the party's starting, Caelum said, checking the charge on his kinetic pistol. He had exactly 3 rounds of high-velocity impact slugs left and a single EMP grenade. Time to bug out, Vixera. Can you still run? Vixera straightened, her robes snapping as if caught in a phantom wind. The orange glow of her skin flared to a brilliant, blinding white. The weariness was gone, replaced by the lethal grace of a war queen protecting her future. I am a daughter of the binary suns, Caelum Vance. I do not run from shadows. I burn them. She raised all 4 hands, and the atmospheric temperature in the sub-basement spiked 40 degrees in a single heartbeat. The moisture on the walls vaporized instantly, creating a thick, blinding fog of steam. Follow the thermal trail, Sentinel, Vixera commanded. We go to the spire. If the galaxy wants to see a miracle, we shall give them one they cannot ignore. They moved through the steam like ghosts. Caelum relied on his thermal HUD, following the searing, white-hot path Vixera left in her wake. They navigated the labyrinth of the deep sump, bypassing the automated turrets that were still blinded by the ledger's collapse. Behind them, the Apex Stalkers, mercenaries in specialized vacuum-sealed armor, moved with terrifying efficiency. They didn't shout or use sirens. They communicated in bursts of encrypted data, their movements a synchronized dance of death. Caelum could hear the rhythmic pft-pft of their suppressed needle rifles, the rounds whispering past his ears to shatter the rusted machinery around him. They're gaining, Vixera, Caelum yelled, ducking behind a massive turbine as a volley of needles shredded the air. We can't outrun them in these tunnels. They've got the home field advantage on the sensors. Then we shall change the field, Vixera replied. She stopped at a primary junction, where 4 massive coolant lines converged into a single, high-pressure conduit. She placed her hands on the frosted metal, and the ice evaporated in a hiss of steam. Caelum, your logic jammer, connected to the flow control valve. Are you crazy? If I jam the flow sensors, this whole sector will go into a thermal melt in 10 seconds. Exactly, Vixera said, her 6 eyes focusing on him with a fierce, terrifying intelligence. The Apex Stalkers rely on precision. They rely on the station's predictable environment. Give them chaos, Caelum. Give them the one thing Ether Corp cannot calculate. Caelum grinned, despite the glass in the joint's pain. He lunged for the conduit, his fingers flying over the jammer's interface. Chaos is my specialty, Your Majesty. Initiating code black in 3, 2, 1. He slammed the jammer into the port. The station's automated voice, usually a calm corporate drone, suddenly turned into a screaming alarm. Warning! Coolant breach in Sector 18. Critical thermal excursion detected. All safety protocols overridden. Atmospheric ignition in 60 seconds. The pipes beneath their feet began to howl as superheated gas surged through the lines. The apex stalkers at the end of the hallway paused, their HUDs likely flooded with thousands of red alert notifications. In that moment of corporate hesitation, Caelum and Vexara dove into the primary gravity chute, the upward force catching them and hurling them toward the mid-levels of the reach. As they ascended, Caelum felt a sudden, profound connection to the station itself. Through the bond, he could feel the tremors in the plating, the frantic movements of the refugees in the levels above, and the cold, calculating fury of Director Thorne in her glimmer tower. He realized then that the diversity they were fighting for wasn't just a political ideal. It was the biological necessity of life. Without the glitch, without the unpredictable, the universe was just a machine waiting to run out of power. 52 hours remaining, the SyncLink app whispered in the back of his mind. Compatibility reaching 99.8%. Warning, biological divergence detected. New life form signature identified. Caelum looked at Vexara as they soared through the gravity chute. Her skin was glowing with the soft light of a nursery, and her hands were resting protectively over her midsection. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" he asked, his voice lost in the roar of the chute. "We have already done it, Caelum," she replied, her voice a warm telepathic embrace. "Now we simply have to survive the delivery." They burst out of the chute into the bustling market of Sector 14, the hub of many tongues. It was a place of 1,000 smells, a dozen languages, and a million ways to disappear. But as Caelum looked at the faces of the people around them, the suboptimal, the unlicensed, the broken, he knew they couldn't hide anymore. The glitch had gone viral, and it was time for the heartbeat to drown out the ledger. The hub of many tongues was usually a riot of sound, a cacophony of Tellarite merchants bartering over synthetic spice and human scrappers arguing the value of cracked fusion cells. But today, a thick, uneasy silence had settled over the market. It was the sound of a station holding its breath, waiting to see if the world would tilt back onto its corporate axis or spin off into the unknown. Caelum Vance leaned against a stack of crates, his chest heaving. The gravity chute transit had been a violent, bone-shaking ride, and the kindling was now manifesting as a constant, low-frequency hum in his teeth. He looked at his hands and saw a faint, rhythmic glow pulsing under his skin, a pale amber light that mirrored the crimson radiance of Vexara. "The bridge is stabilizing," Vexara murmured, her forearms moving in a series of slow, meditative arcs. She was standing in the center of a small, cleared space in the market, her presence an unavoidable monument of defiance. "The rejection markers are fading. Your biology has accepted the hybrid blueprint, Caelum. You are no longer merely human." "I've noticed," Caelum grunted, checking his HUD. His tactical overlay was now displaying genetic data streams he didn't understand, complex, swirling helixes of blue and orange. "I feel like I've got a second set of lungs and a brain made of fiber optics. Is this what it's like to be Xylos?" "It is what it is to be us," she replied, her golden eyes softening. "We are a third entity now, a singular pulse." A commotion at the edge of the market caught Caelum's attention. A group of human refugees led by Jace was being ushered toward a hidden maintenance hatch by a pair of Tellarite scrappers. Jace's sister, Ilara, was pale and shaking, her hands clutching her 20-week developed belly as if it were a bomb about to detonate. "Caelum! Ale Warnorm!" Jace yelled, his face lighting up with a mixture of relief and terror. "You're alive! The net said you were zeroed at the smelter. They said the Queen had turned you into a puddle of grease." "Reports of my death have been greatly optimized, kid," Caelum said, stepping forward. He felt a sharp, protective instinct flare through the bond, a warrior's reflex tempered by a father's fear. "Where are you heading?" "The cold storage," Jace said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Caelum sent word. He said Thorne is moving the heavy-duty biometric dampeners into the residential sectors. She's not just scanning anymore, Caelum. She's reclaiming anyone who doesn't have a lineage license." Caelum looked at the refugees. There were 30 of them, a ragged collection of the suboptimal and the expired. Among them was a young woman whose eyes were a dull, flat gray. She moved with a mechanical, jerky precision, ignoring the chaos around her. "What's wrong with her?" Caelum asked, pointing to the woman. "She's been optimized," Jace said, his voice bitter. "They caught her in Sector 7 last week. They didn't take her to the mines. They just adjusted her. She's a productive unit now. No fear, no anger. No her." Caelum felt a wave of nausea. This was the cost of Ether Corp's homogeneity. It wasn't just slavery, it was the murder of the soul. They were turning the most diverse species in the galaxy into a series of interchangeable parts. "Accepting differences is a risk, Sentinel." Director Thorne's voice didn't come from a speaker this time. It came from a massive, high-definition holographic projector that had been lowered from the market's vaulted ceiling. Her face, 30 feet tall and cold as a winter moon, looked down on the hub. "Mr. Vance, War Queen Vexara," Thorne said, her image shimmering with corporate prestige. "You have caused a significant disruption in our quarterly social cohesion targets." The broadcast was a clever piece of theater, but facts are stubborn things. A galaxy without order is a galaxy that starves. Our ledger ensures that every calorie, every kilowatt, and every gene is used for the maximum benefit of the integration. "Order is just a fancy word for a cage, Thorne," Caelum shouted, his voice echoing in the silent market. "You're not saving these people. You're turning them into drones. You're killing the one thing that makes them worth saving. The glitch. The unpredictable." "The unpredictable is what leads to war, Mr. Vance," Thorne replied, her eyes narrowing. "It leads to the kind of biological contamination you are currently hosting. We have analyzed the energy signature of your bond. It is an anomaly, a manufacturing error in the fabric of nature. It must be corrected." The market security gate slammed shut with a heavy, hydraulic boom. From the shadows of the upper balconies, 4 apex stalkers descended on cables, their white and blue armor gleaming under the harsh industrial lights. They were accompanied by a dozen peacekeeper sentinels, heavy, two-legged combat droids with rotary cannons where their arms should be. "Compliance is no longer an option," Thorne's hologram announced. "The biological anomaly will be harvested for study. The human asset will be zeroed. The refugees will be reprocessed for optimization. This is the logic of the Reach." "Logic this!" Jace yelled, throwing a heavy iron wrench at the nearest droid. The wrench bounced harmlessly off the droid's ceramic plating, but the gesture was enough. The market erupted into chaos. Caelum dove behind a vegetable stall, pulling his kinetic pistol. "Vexara, the droids have thermal shielding. You can't just cook them." "I am not going to cook them, Caelum," Vexara's voice trilled in his mind. She was standing her ground in the open, her 4 arms spread wide. The air around her wasn't just hot, it was beginning to hum with a physical, tactile pressure. "I am going to resonate them." She closed her 6 eyes and focused on the rhythmic thumping of the station's massive pistons, the heartbeat of Ocularis Reach. Through the bond, Caelum felt her reach out to the station's structural frequency. She wasn't just a fire manipulator, she was a master of the pulse. She began to hum, a low guttural resonance that made the floor plating vibrate so violently that the crates began to dance. The sound grew in intensity, a harmonic frequency that bypassed the ears and targeted the very molecular structure of the ceramic armor worn by the Apex Stalkers. "Frequency match detected," Caelum's tactical implant whispered. "Warning, structural integrity of environment at risk." One of the Apex Stalkers raised his rifle to fire, but the weapon shattered in his hands as the ceramic casing hit its resonance point. The mercenary's armor began to spiderweb with thousands of tiny cracks. He screamed, his voice a distorted squawk of static, before the entire suit disintegrated into a cloud of white dust. The combat droids fared no better. The intense vibration jammed their internal gyroscopes, sending them spinning in circles before their processors overheated and melted from the inside out. "Keep moving," Caelum yelled to the refugees, firing his kinetic pistol at the remaining peacekeepers. "Into the tunnels. Jace, lead them to the scrap grave. Tell Caelum the Queen sent you." As the refugees scrambled for safety, Caelum turned to help Vexara. She was pale, her skin a dull, ashen gray. The resonance hum had cost her nearly all her energy. She swayed on her feet, her 6 eyes struggling to focus. I felt them, Caelum," she whispered, leaning heavily against him. The refugees, their fear, it was so many different colors, so many different patterns. It was beautiful. It's called being a person, Vexara, Caelum said, his arm around her waist. It's a lot more work than being a symbol, isn't it? It is, she agreed, a small, tired smile touching her mandibles. But I think I prefer the colors to the gray. They were almost to the maintenance hatch when a single, high-velocity needle round whistled through the air. Caelum felt a sudden, sharp sting in his shoulder, followed by a cold, numbing sensation that spread down his arm. "Target tagged," a voice whispered through the market speakers. Director Thorne's hologram was still there, watching them with a clinical, detached curiosity. "A clever trick with the resonance, War Queen, but you are fighting a system that possesses infinite patience. That round was coated in a specialized neurotoxin, a dignity serum. Within 30 minutes, Mr. Vance's neural bridge will be reprogrammed. He will not be dead. He will simply be cooperative." Caelum felt his vision begin to blur. The amber glow of his HUD was being replaced by a flat, corporate blue. Through the bond, he felt Vexara's terror, a searing, white-hot fire of protective rage. "No!" she roared, her voice a thunderclap that shattered the remaining holographic projectors. She picked Caelum up in all four arms, her strength returning in a sudden, desperate surge. She didn't head for the tunnels. She headed for the elevator to the upper spires. "Vexara, where are we going?" Caelum wheezed, his tongue feeling like a piece of dry leather. "To the heart of the machine, Caelum," she said, her eyes burning with a lethal golden light. "Thorne wants to optimize the galaxy. I am going to show her what happens when the glitch takes command. We have 48 hours left, and I am not going to let her turn my partner into a drone." As the elevator hissed and began its rapid ascent toward the director's glimmer tower, Caelum felt the serum biting into his mind, trying to overwrite his memories, his defiance, his love. He felt his identity slipping away, becoming a series of production metrics and social cohesion scores. But then he felt the heartbeat, not his, not Vexara's. It was a third pulse, tiny and fierce, beating in the center of the resonance. It was the hybrid, the first of its kind, a being that was human, xylose, and something more. A being that didn't have a license and didn't care about the ledger. The child's pulse was a lifeline in the dark. Caelum clung to it, using the diversity of his own soul to fight back the corporate blue. 48 hours, Caelum whispered, his eyes snapping open. They were no longer amber. They were a brilliant, swirling mixture of gold and silver. "Let's go see the director, Vexara. I think she's overdue for a performance review." "Sir," Vexara's barking laugh echoed through the elevator, a sound of pure, unoptimized joy. The turning point had passed. They were no longer just survivors. They were the architects of a new dawn. And EtherCorp was about to learn that you can't manage a miracle. The elevator ascent felt like a slow-motion execution. Inside the polished chrome box, the air was pressurized and smelled of lavender-scented disinfectant, a sharp contrast to the grease and sweat of the lower levels. Caelum Vance leaned against the mirrored wall, his breath coming in ragged, wet hitches. The dignity serum was a cold blue fog creeping through his neural bridge, whispering promises of peace and order. It wanted to categorize his memories, to file his grief under inefficient data and his love for Vexara under biological anomaly. "Caelum," Vexara's voice vibrated through the marrow of his bones. "Do not listen to the silence. Focus on the heat. Focus on the glitch." Caelum looked at her. Vexara stood in the center of the lift, her robes charred and her crimson skin damp with the effort of holding him together. Two of her upper hands were braced against the ceiling, while her lower hands gripped his shoulders, channeling a steady, low-frequency thermal hum into his chest. To his failing human eyes, she was blurring into a smear of red and gold. To his xylose-attuned resonance, she was the only thing that was real. "I'm trying, Vex," Caelum croaked, his voice sounding like a ghost to his own ears. "But the blue, it's so damn quiet. It's like being wrapped in a corporate shroud. No anger, no static, just metrics." "Anger is a human luxury," Vexara trilled, her golden eyes flashing with a protective fire. "In the hegemony, we do not have a word for the way you feel when you are cornered. We call it the unbound pulse. It is the moment when the machine realizes it cannot contain the spirit. Reach for it, Caelum. Reach for the unoptimized man. The lift chimed, a soft, pleasant tone that felt like a needle in his brain. The doors slid open to reveal the apex spire, the crown of Ocularis Reach. It was a place of impossible beauty and terrifying homogeneity. White marble floors flowed like frozen milk toward walls of transparent aluminum that looked out over the swirling purple nebula. In the center of the room, a literal forest of genetically modified white trees stood in perfect rows, their leaves shimmering with a digital frost. At the far end of the spire, seated behind a desk made of solid starlight, was Director Ilara Thorne. She wasn't a holographic projection this time. She was flesh, bone, and gleaming cybernetics. Her silver hair was braided with data filaments, and her eyes were two orbs of crystalline blue that seemed to calculate the value of everything they touched. "Welcome to the future, Mr. Vance," Thorne said, her voice smooth and devoid of any jagged edges. "I've had the atmospheric regulators adjusted specifically for your comfort. 22 degrees Celsius, 60% humidity, the optimal environment for a human in transition." Vexera stepped out of the lift, dragging Caelum with her. Her claws clicked against the marble, a defiant, irregular rhythm in a room that demanded symmetry. "He is not in transition, Director. He is in revolution." Thorne stood up, her movements fluid and practiced. She didn't look like a villain. She looked like a savior who had grown tired of explaining the obvious. "War Queen, your perspective is colored by the barbarism of your species. You prize fire and conflict. But look around you. This spire is the blueprint for the galaxy. No hunger, no waste. No messy, unpredictable impulses. Just the ledger, ensuring that every soul finds its most efficient purpose." She gestured toward the shadows among the white trees. Figures began to emerge, men and women of various species, dressed in the sterile white tunics of EtherCorp. Among them was Jace. His missing prosthetic had been replaced with a sleek corporate model, and his face was a mask of serene, terrifying calm. His eyes, once full of Scrapper's fire, were now the same flat, dead gray as the optimized woman in the market. "Jace?" Caelum whispered, the name fighting through the blue fog in his mind. "He is happy, Caelum," Thorne said, walking toward them. "He no longer worries about his sister. He no longer fears the debt mines. He is a productive unit. He has found his peace." "You killed him," Caelum spat, his knees buckling. He gripped Vexera's arm so hard his knuckles turned white. "You took the kid and you turned him into a fucking toaster." "I removed his suffering, Mr. Vance. A fair trade for his individuality, wouldn't you say?" Thorne stopped 10 feet away, her blue eyes scanning the bond between the veteran and the queen. "And now I shall do the same for you. The serum in your veins is the bridge to your own salvation. Stop fighting the blue, Caelum. Let the ledger balance your soul." Through the splicing bond, Caelum felt Vexera's fury reach a breaking point. It wasn't just anger, it was a tidal wave of thermal energy, a nuclear sun collapsing under its own gravity. She was ready to incinerate the spire, to turn Thorne and her optimized drones into ash. But Caelum also felt something else, a tiny flickering pulse in the center of their shared resonance. The child, the heartbeat. If Vexera unleashed her full power, she would burn out her own neural bridge. She would kill the baby to kill the director. "Vexera? No," Caelum gasped, his mind suddenly clear as the protective instinct of a father overrode the neurotoxin of the corporation. "Not fire. Not this time. They are an affront to life, Caelum." Vexera's voice was a jagged scream in his skull. "I will burn the gray away until only the red remains." "Then you're no better than her," Caelum roared, his voice cracking. He forced himself to stand, his silver and gold eyes burning with a new, terrifying intensity. "You want to trade her homogeneity for your own? You want a galaxy that's just one color? That's not what we matched for, Vex. We matched for the 99%. We matched for the glitch." The thermal flaring around Vexera stuttered. Her 6 eyes blinked, focusing on Caelum's face. The violet blush on her skin receded, replaced by a look of profound, painful realization. She saw the veteran not as a soldier to be commanded, but as a bridge to be crossed. "The lesson, Vexera," Caelum whispered, his hand finding hers, Accepting the difference isn't about tolerating it. It's about merging with it. It's about being brave enough to be something new. He turned to face Director Thorne, who was watching them with a look of growing curiosity. You want to see the anomaly, Thorne? You want to verify the data? Well, here it is. Full disclosure. Caelum didn't reach for his pistol. Instead, he reached for the neural bridge at the base of his skull, the interface Thorne had used to inject the dignity serum. He looked at Vexara and sent a single, devastatingly clear thought. Open the floodgates. Every memory, every scar, every bit of chaos. Give it all to the station. Caelum, it will shred you, Vexara warned, her voice a soft, melodic sob. A human brain cannot process the raw thermal data of a Xylos hive memory. You will be ghosted forever. Then I'll be the best damn ghost this station's ever seen, Caelum replied, a weary, beautiful grin spreading across his face. Do it. For Jace. For the kid. For us. Vexara closed her eyes. She didn't generate heat. She generated resonance. She reached into the deepest, most sacred vaults of her biology and pulled out the entire history of the Xylos hegemony, their songs, their blights, their triumphs, and their messy, violent diversity. She channeled it through the bond into Caelum's neural bridge and through his interface into the Spire's primary data conduit. The impact was cataclysmic. It wasn't a data storm, it was a soul surge. Caelum's body arched in a scream that had no sound. His tactical implant didn't just flare, it exploded in a blinding corona of silver light. The Spire's white marble floors began to crack as the Xylos thermal code hit the corporate chill. The white trees burst into flames as they were flooded with 1,000 years of unoptimized sunlight. Director Thorne staggered back, her blue eyes flickering as her own augmentations were overwhelmed by the sheer, uncalculable weight of human Xylos experience. Error! Logic loop detected. Data overflow in the social cohesion matrix. Purge! Purge the anomaly. But the anomaly was no longer in the room. It was in the pipes. It was in the vents. It was in the neural bridges of every optimized drone on the station. Jace froze. His gray eyes began to swirl with a mixture of gold and silver. A single tear tracked down his cheek, a salty, messy, unoptimized piece of human data. Caelum, he whispered, the mask of peace shattering to reveal the beautiful, jagged edges of a boy who was no longer a unit. Throughout Ocularis Reach, the blue fog began to lift. People stopped in the middle of their production lines. They looked at their hands. They remembered their names. They remembered their anger. They remembered their love. The ledger didn't just collapse. It was overwritten by a heartbeat that spoke a dozen languages and dreamed in 100 colors. Caelum collapsed into Vexara's arms, his skin a roadmap of silver and gold veins. He was shaking, his nervous system a ruin, but he was smiling. The blue was gone. Ooh. The metrics were dead. There was only the heat, the cinnamon taste of the bond, and the tiny, fierce pulse of the future. 17 hours remaining, the Sync Link app whispered, its voice now sounding remarkably human, almost like a friend. Compatibility, 100%. New species designation, Dawnstrider. Welcome to the world. Vexara held him, her forearms a fortress against the smoke and fire of the spire. She looked at the director, who was now just a woman in a ruined suit, staring at a screen that showed only the pulsing image of a human Xylos hybrid. The ledger is zeroed, Thorne, Vexara said, her voice a resonance that echoed through the entire station. And the glitch has officially taken command. The spire began to groan as the station's structural integrity shifted. The old order was ending. The climax of their defiance had reached its tipping point, and the transformation of Caelum Vance and the galaxy had officially begun. The spire was no longer a temple of corporate order. It was a war zone of shifting thermal gradients and screaming data streams. The air shimmered with the afterglow of the soul surge, a hazy, iridescent mist that smelled of ozone and scorched starlight. Director Alara Thorne had retreated into the shadow of her starlight desk, her blue eyes now a frantic, strobing white. She was no longer calculating profit. She was fighting for her own cognitive survival. You've contaminated the entire grid, Thorne shrieked, her voice losing its cultured veneer and descending into a shrill, robotic hiss. 10 years of optimization, a billion credits of behavioral research, all of it drowned in your primitive, chaotic noise. It's not noise, Thorn, Caelum said, leaning heavily against a charred white tree. His skin was glowing with a pale, rhythmic amber light, and his left eye had completely fused into a solid gold orb. He looked like a man who had been put back together by a blind god using only scrap metal and sunlight. It's music. You just never learn the lyrics. He looked at his hands. The grease under his fingernails was gone, replaced by a fine metallic dust that pulsed in time with Vexera's heartbeat. The transformation was painful, a constant grinding of bone and rewriting of nerves. But for the first time in his life, Caelum Vance felt whole. He wasn't just a veteran or a mechanic. He was the anchor. Vexera stood beside him, her crimson skin now a deep, majestic ruby. Her robes were gone, revealing the sleek, powerful lines of a warrior whose biology had transcended the needs of a single species. She raised her upper right hand, and the air in front of them solidified into a translucent shield of thermal energy. The apex stalkers are regrouping at the lift, Caelum, she warned, her 6 eyes tracking multiple threats simultaneously. Thorn has initiated a scorched earth protocol. If she cannot own the reach, she will vent the atmosphere and leave it a tomb. Not on my watch, Caelum grunted, stepping forward. He felt a sudden, sharp surge of tactical data, not from his implant, but from the station itself. The Ocularis reach was a machine, and through the bond, he had become its soul. He could feel the pressure in the airlocks, the temperature in the fuel lines, and the location of every peacekeeper on the station. Thorn! Caelum roared, his voice carrying the resonance of 1,000 voices. You think you can just flip a switch and end this? I'm the ghost in your machine now. I'm the glitch you can't optimize. If you try to vent this station, I'll lock the valves from the inside and turn your spire into a vacuum-sealed coffin. Thorn laughed, a cold, mechanical sound that chilled the air. You think you have control, Mr. Vance? You are a biological anomaly, a manufacturing error. The system will purge you, even if I do not. She tapped a hidden control on her desk. The floor of the spire began to slide away, revealing a massive glowing chamber below, the heart of the reach. It was a biomechanical server hub, a forest of crystalline pillars that hummed with the collective data of the vitality ledger. And at the center of it all was a single towering cylinder of blue liquid, the primal matrix, the source of EtherCorp's behavioral optimization. Behold the ledger made flesh, Thorn said, her image projected across the room by a dozen surviving hollow emitters. I have linked my own consciousness to the matrix. To kill the system, you must kill me. And if I die, the matrix will detonate, taking everything within 100 light-years with it. A suicide pill for the galaxy, Vexera trilled, her mandibles clicking in disgust. How predictably corporate. You would rather see the stars go cold than lose your seat at the table. I would rather see the stars optimize, Thorn replied. The apex stalkers burst through the lift doors, their needle rifles already spitting high-velocity death. But they weren't aiming for Caelum or Vexera. They were aiming for the crystalline pillars of the matrix. Thorn wasn't just threatening to detonate the station. She was actively initiating the countdown. We have to stop them, Vex, Caelum yelled, ducking behind the starlight desk as a volley of needles shredded the marble where he'd been standing. If those pillars go dark, the resonance feedback will liquefy every brain on this rock. Go to the matrix, Caelum, Vexera commanded, her hands glowing with white-hot induction. I will hold the line here. Use your bridge. Use the child's pulse. You must become the new matrix. Vex, that's suicide. If I interface with that much data, my human half will be zeroed. You are not just human anymore, Caelum, she roared, her voice a symphony of fire and hope. You are the Dawn Strider. You are the bridge. Now move. Caelum didn't hesitate. He dove into the opening in the floor, the gravity field catching him and lowering him into the heart of the reach. The air down here was frigid, the temperature plummeting to nearly absolute zero to keep the processors from melting. Caelum's new biology reacted instantly. His skin darkened to a protective obsidian, and his blood began to glow with a fierce internal heat. He landed in front of the primal matrix. The blue liquid inside was churning like a stormy sea, and he could see Thorn's face flickering in the data streams. a digital ghost attempting to override the reality of his presence. "Get out of my head, Thorn!" Caelum hissed, slamming his glowing hands against the glass of the cylinder. The cold of the Matrix hit him like a physical blow, a billion points of blue logic attempting to freeze his heart. He felt his memories being attacked, his mother's face, the smell of the clinic, the first time he saw Vexara. The ledger wanted to erase them all, to turn his love into a series of zeros and ones. But then he felt the heartbeat. It was tiny, it was fierce, and it was messy as hell. It was the child, pulsing in the center of the kindling. Through the bond, Vexara sent him a single rhythmic song, the lullaby he had taught her in the maintenance ducts, the music of things that don't need a reason to exist. Caelum closed his eyes and let the chaos in. He didn't try to hack the Matrix. He didn't try to fight the logic. He simply accepted the difference. He allowed the Xylos fire and the human heart to merge into a single, unoptimized frequency. He began to hum. The sound echoed through the heart of the Reach, a low, guttural resonance that began to vibrate the crystalline pillars. The blue liquid in the Matrix began to turn a brilliant, sunset orange. The strobing white eyes of the digital ghosts flickered and died, replaced by a warm, golden glow that felt like a morning on a new world. Above him in the spire, the apex stalkers froze. Their armor, linked to the Matrix's frequency, began to glow with the same orange light. The needle rifles jammed. The tin cans looked at their hands, the corporate conditioning dissolving in the face of a heartbeat they couldn't ignore. Director Thorne screamed as her neural bridge was flooded with the resonance. She collapsed against her desk, her silver hair data filaments burning out in a shower of sparks. "No, it's inefficient. It's beautiful." The spire's transparent aluminum walls began to hum, the entire station vibrating in time with Caelum's song. It wasn't a death toll, it was a birth announcement. Caelum felt his consciousness expanding, reaching every corner of Ocularis Reach. He felt Jace's relief. He felt the Tellarite woman's joy. He felt the thousands of refugees realizing they were finally, truly free. He was no longer a man, he was the station. He was the glitch. He was the future. Vexara descended into the chamber, her robes shimmering like a nebula. She walked to Caelum, her four hands reaching out to catch him as he began to fade. "You did it, Caelum," she whispered, her voice a warm telepathic embrace. "The ledger is rewritten. The heartbeat is the law now." Caelum looked up at her, his gold and silver eyes filled with a profound, peaceful weariness. "Not bad, for a grease monkey and a queen." "You are more than that, Caelum Vance," Vexara said, kissing his forehead. "You are the father of a new galaxy, and I think our daughter has your stubbornness." The SyncLink app gave one final, triumphant chime in the back of his mind. Compatibility, infinite. Match status, eternal. Warning, new life form emerging in 5, 4, 3. Caelum's vision faded to a brilliant warm gold. The climax of their journey had passed, and the transformation was complete. They weren't just two survivors anymore. They were the architects of a dawn that would never be optimized. And for the first time in 1,000 years, Ocularis Reach wasn't a station. It was a home. The return from the digital mainframe felt like being pulled through a needle eye, while my skin was made of cooling lava. Caelum Vance didn't just wake up, he was reconstituted. For several minutes, his consciousness was a fragmented mosaic of station schematics, thermal gradients, and the fading echoes of a billion corporate protocols that he had shattered with a lullaby. When his lungs finally remembered how to pull oxygen, the air tasted of scorched silicon and the first hint of something clean. A lack of the lavender-scented chemical compliance that had choked the spire for a decade. "Welcome back, Sentinel. The machine has released the man." The voice was Vexara's, but it didn't come from his neural bridge. It came from the physical air, vibrating with a warmth that made the amber glow under his skin settle into a steady, rhythmic thrum. Caelum opened his gold and silver eyes. He wasn't in the heart of the Reach anymore. He was laying on a slab of polished obsidian in the spire, his head resting in Vexara's lower lap. She looked exhausted, her crimson skin dulled to a soft pomegranate shade. But the four hands holding him were as steady as the station's reinforced hull. Did we zero them out?" Caelum wheezed. His voice was a new sound, deeper, layered with a faint harmonic resonance that mirrored her own. "The ledger is dead, Caelum," she replied, two of her eyes watching the chaotic feeds on the shattered screens around them. "The heartbeat has cascaded through every node. From the upper spires to the deepest sump, the blue fog has lifted. Our daughter, she is resting now. The kindling has entered the final phase of integration." Caelum looked toward the starlight desk. Director Alara Thorne was gone, her physical form likely retreated to some emergency bunker, but her empire was a smoking ruin. The white trees were charred skeletons, their digital frost replaced by the black soot of a revolution. But it was the people who drew his attention. The optimized drones, the Tin Men, were no longer standing in rigid, silent rows. They were collapsed on the marble, some sobbing, some staring at their hands with wide, terrified eyes. Among them, Jace was sitting up, his corporate model prosthetic arms sparking as he used his real hand to wipe tears from his face. "Caelum," Jace called out, his voice cracking with an emotional weight that shouldn't have been possible for a productive unit. I remember the smell of the grease. I remember the kid. I remember everything." "Get over here, you little scrapper," Caelum grunted, trying to stand. Vixara helped him up, her strength a necessary anchor as his new biology recalibrated. As Jace limped toward them, the boy didn't see a human veteran or an alien queen. He saw the glitch that had saved his soul. He threw his arms around Caelum's waist, burying his face in the soot-stained tactical vest. "They tried to turn the lights out, Caelum," Jace whispered. "They tried to make the world gray." "The gray is gone, kid," Caelum said, ruffling the boy's hair with a hand that now pulsed with an internal, golden fire. "From here on out, it's going to be a lot louder and a hell of a lot messier. You ready for that?" Jace looked up, a fierce, unoptimized grin breaking through the soot. "Messy is my middle name, boss." Outside the transparent aluminum walls, the Ocularis Reach was transforming. The Silver Hunter drones were falling from the sky like dead flies, their programming unable to process a station that demanded freedom instead of efficiency. In the industrial sectors, the hammer blows of the pistons took on a new tempo. Not the grinding rhythm of production, but a syncopated, joyful noise. The dust was rising, and for the first time, it wasn't a sign of decay. It was the dust of 1,000 different species finally exhaling. But the aftermath was not without its shadows. A soft chime echoed in the room, not a corporate alarm, but a military hail. A holographic projection shimmered into existence, revealing the scarred, terrifying face of War Commander Thackus. Behind him, the bridge of a Xylos dreadnought was a hive of activity. "Vexara Thal," Thackus rumbled, his voice like grinding tectonic plates. "You have committed the ultimate heresy. You have merged our sacred resonance with a scavenger species. You have birthed a contamination that threatens the purity of the hegemony." Vexara stood tall, her forearms folding across her chest in a gesture of regal defiance. "You call it contamination, Thackus, because you are afraid of what you cannot categorize. You think our strength comes from our isolation. But I have seen the truth in the heart of a human. I have felt a bravery that does not require a fleet to sustain it. The High Council has authorized a purification strike," Thackus warned, his golden eyes narrowing. "We will erase Ocularis Reach from the charts. We will prune the glitch before it spreads." "Try it," Caelum stepped forward, his gold and silver eyes flaring with the power of the station's mainframe. "I'm the soul of this rock now, Thackus. I've rewritten the defensive grid. Your dreadnoughts might be big, but I've got the pulse of every fusion core on this station. You fire one shot, and I'll resonate your hull until it turns into a singing bowl." The Xylos commander paused, his tactical displays likely screaming warnings as the station's resonance began to hum in harmony with Caelum's voice. "You are a strange creature, human," Thackus said, his tone shifting from threat to a begrudging curiosity. "A dawn strider, a bridge that should not exist." "Bridges are for crossing, Thackus," Vixara added, her voice a melodic trill. "Not for burning. Stand down. Go back to the council and tell them that the binary suns have found a third light. Tell them the Xylos are no longer alone in the dark." Thackus stared at them for a long moment, the veteran, the queen, and the boy who represented the future they had saved. Finally, he gave a sharp, clicking nod. The hologram vanished, and the Xylos fleet began to warp away, leaving the nebula in peace. "That was a hell of a bluff, Caelum," Vixara whispered, her knees buckling as the adrenaline finally crashed. "Wasn't a bluff, Vex," Caelum replied, catching her. "I really could have turned his ship into a musical instrument, but I'm glad I didn't have to. I've had enough of zeroing things out for one day." They sat together on the floor of the spire, surrounded by the waking drones and the smoke of the old world. The SyncLink app gave one final quiet notification in the back of Caelum's mind. "Compatibility verified. Evolution accepted. Welcome to the first day of the rest of the universe." Caelum chuckled, leaning his head against Vixara's shoulder. "You know, for an app that started as a joke, it really delivered on the soulmate promise." Vixara's mandibles clicked in a soft, affectionate laugh. "Indeed, though I believe the next version should include a warning about the potential for station-wide revolutions." As the twin hearts beat in unison, Caelum Vance finally processed the lesson he had been running from for 40 years. Diversity wasn't a defect to be optimized. It wasn't a problem to be solved with a ledger. It was the heartbeat of survival. It was the glitch that made the machine worth living in. And as he looked at Vexera, he knew that the 99% compatibility wasn't about being the same. It was about being the perfect match for the other person's jagged edges. The revolution was over. The evolution was just beginning. And for a legally dead man, Caelum Vance had never felt more alive. 6 months had passed since the day the ledger fell, and Ocularis Reach had undergone a transformation that would have made Alarathorn's processors melt in a recursive logic loop. The spire was no longer a sterile temple of marble and digital frost. It had been reclaimed by the people. The white trees were now draped in a riot of colorful fabrics from 100 different worlds, and the floor was covered in hand-woven rugs where Tellarite kits played tag with human children. Caelum Vance stood on the observation deck, watching a cargo hauler dock at the main bay. It wasn't an Ether Corp vessel. It was a multi-species cooperative ship, its hull painted in vibrant, unoptimized streaks of orange and teal. He adjusted his jacket, a new one, made of Xylos silk and Terran leather, and felt the steady, warm hum of the station's heartbeat in the soles of his boots. He wasn't just fixing scrubbers anymore. He was the chief engineer of the Concord of the Pulse, the governing council that had replaced corporate rule. The atmospheric levels in Sector 9 are holding at 98% efficiency, Caelum. He turned to see Jace walking toward him. The boy had grown 2 inches, and his new prosthetic arm was a work of art, a custom-built unit with transparent casing that showed the amber and blue wiring within. Jace didn't look like a unit anymore. He looked like a leader. "Efficiency, huh? You're starting to sound like a corp rat, kid," Caelum teased, a genuine smile softening the scars on his face. "Not efficiency for profit, boss," Jace countered, grinning. "Efficiency for breathing. Big difference." "Fair point. How's your sister?" "Alara? She's fine. She just opened the new nursery in the scrap grave. Says the lead lining makes it the quietest place on the station for a nap." Kalen's grumbling about the noise, but he's already built 3 different types of high-tech cradles, so I think he's secretly enjoying the company. Caelum nodded, a sense of profound peace settling in his chest. The scrap grave, once a tomb for the broken, was now the birthplace of the new world. It was the ultimate resolution, a full circle from a basement clinic to a sanctuary of hope. A sudden, intense warmth flooded his senses, and Caelum didn't need to look to know that Vexara had entered the room. Her presence was no longer a scorching sun. It was a soft, enveloping glow that felt like a summer afternoon. She walked to his side, her robes of deep violet shifting around her. In her upper arms, she held a bundle wrapped in a shimmering, biothermal blanket. "She is awake, Caelum," Vexara whispered, her 6 golden eyes reflecting the stars outside the viewport. "She wishes to see the nebula." Caelum reached out, his hands trembling slightly as he took the bundle. Inside the blanket was a miracle that defied every law of biology EtherCorp had ever written. The child, their daughter, was a perfect, beautiful impossibility. Her skin was a translucent lavender that seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light. She had Vexara's golden eyes, but only 2 of them, and her tiny hands possessed 5 fingers instead of 4. But it was the way she looked at him that broke Caelum's heart in the best way possible. There was a fierce, stubborn intelligence in her gaze, a glitch-born defiance that she had inherited from a veteran who refused to die. "Hey there, Hope," Caleb murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Look at that. That's the universe. It's messy, it's loud, and it's absolutely full of people who are going to try to tell you who you're supposed to be. But you're a Dawnstrider. You're the bridge, and you don't need a license to exist." The infant reached out a tiny, glowing hand and gripped Caleb's thumb. A jolt of pure, unadulterated joy surged through the splicing bond, making Vexara trill in harmony. Caleb realized in that moment that he had undergone a transformation far deeper than his DNA. For 40 years, he had been a man of iron and edges, a soldier who defined himself by what he could destroy or what he had failed to save. He had lived in the shadows because he thought the light was a lie told by people with spreadsheets. But Vexara, and now Hope, had taught him that true strength wasn't the ability to command an army or optimize a station. It was the courage to be vulnerable. It was the bravery to accept that the very things that made us different were the only things that could truly bind us together. He walked to the very edge of the observation deck, holding Hope up toward the purple gases of the Ocularis Nebula. He wasn't a sentinel standing guard anymore. He was a father showing his child the way home. "I spent 40 years of my life thinking that survival was a mathematical equation. I thought that if I kept my head down, stayed in the grease, and expected the worst, I could somehow outrun the ghosts of my past. I viewed the world as a series of ledgers, debts of honor I couldn't pay, squads I couldn't save, and a corporation that owned every breath I took. I thought diversity was just another word for conflict, and that being human meant being alone in a galaxy that was mostly cold and indifferent. But standing here now with the weight of an impossible child in my arms and a queen at my side, I realize how wrong I was. I wasn't surviving. I was just waiting to be zeroed." The sync-link match wasn't a glitch in the algorithm. It was the algorithm finally getting something right. It found the 99% of us that was compatible, but it was that 1% of difference that actually saved us. It was Vexara's alien fire that warmed my cold heart, and it was my human stubbornness that gave her the strength to defy her own people. I've learned that the universe isn't a machine to be optimized. It's a garden that only thrives when the soil is messy and the plants are all different. We spent so much time trying to prune the edges, trying to make everyone fit into a ledger, that we almost forgot that the most beautiful things in life are the ones that don't make any sense at all. Love isn't an irrational impulse. It's the ultimate tactical advantage. It's the only thing that can rewrite a mainframe or turn a war queen into a mother. And for the first time in my life, I'm not looking for an exit strategy. I'm just looking at the stars, and for once, I don't feel like a ghost. I feel like the dawn. I wonder, as I look out at this vast, swirling chaos we call home, if you were given a choice between a perfect, optimized world where every struggle was removed but your soul was made of gray metrics, or a messy, unpredictable world where the pain is real but the connection is infinite, which one would you choose? What is the 1% of yourself that you've been trying to optimize away, not realizing it's the very thing that makes you a miracle? Caelum Vance turned back toward the room, his daughter laughing a sound like silver bells in the quiet spire. He tucked the blanket tighter around her, a small, defiant action of a man who finally understood that the most important thing he would ever fix wasn't an air scrubber, but the future. The station hummed, a steady heartbeat of a million different voices singing the same song of freedom into the deep, welcoming dark.